Thank you very much, Rosa, for all your interesting information and lovely words. I would now like to invite Professor Joshi Malatesha, or we know him as Joshi, to say some words about Zvia, which you knew well, and to give his talk, which is entitled Cognitive Component of the Componential Model of Reading Applied to Different Orthographies. Professor Joshi is a professor of literacy, education, English as a second language, and educational psychology at the Texas A&M University. He is currently the founder editor of Reading and Writing, an interdisciplinary journal, rated one of the top 10 journals in education and educational research, and of the Journal of Literacy Studies, Perspectives from Cognitive Neuroscience. As well, he was the founding editor of monograph series on neuropsychology and cognition. In addition, he has been a member of many advisory boards and scientific committees regarding reading and dyslexia. He has written many books and book chapters, as well as published numerous papers in leading journals in reading, bilingualism, and dyslexia. He has been chair of many conferences and is invited to give talks all around the world. But we know he loves coming to Israel, and we love having him here. So it's my great pleasure to invite him to the stage.
Can you all see me? I want to thank Shelley, Orly, Olivka, and Rosa Lightning for inviting me and the entire organizing class, including Claudia. And Zvia was a special friend of mine, and because of Zvia, I could come to your beautiful country. I think this is my 15th time. And it has led my friends to ask, did you ever go home or did you just stay here since your last visit? And everybody knows that Zvia was a scholar. We have already heard her numerous publications and her work in different areas. But Zvia was a family person, and she always talked about her lovely family, children, and grandchildren. And she was also a true friend to many people and a true mentor, as we heard about her students. But what some people may not know was Zvia was an unselfish person. And in July of 2013, I asked her for some data. And I said, Zvia, this is your data. You must be the first author. And she said that, no, I will be the last author. She did not want to take any credit. And this went on, but still almost till the end, she kept on writing that I insist to be the last author. So that led to our work on Hebrew orthography, and so Zvia was a scholar, a family person, friend and mentor to many, and an unselfish person. And this is a rare quality in these days in academia. And she was a remarkable person and a true friend of mine. So, based on what she had said, I wrote that, yes, she can be the last author in this presentation also. So I'm going to talk about the cognitive components of the Componential Model of Reading and different orthographies. And we know that approximately 25% or about 16 million adults and school-age children in the US have difficulty acquiring reading and spelling skills. And I don't know the percentage in Israel, but I suspect that based on the population of Israel, perhaps about 2 to 3 million students might have problem acquiring the basic reading and spelling skills. And in the US data, about 1/3 of 4th grade students cannot comprehend what they read, and this percentage goes higher among minority or inner city school children. And 25% of adults are unable to read a newspaper, and it affects all parts of life. That's why the National Institute of Health called illiteracy a public health issue. And more than 50% of adolescents with criminal problems have, and history of substance abuse, have reading problems. We all know that correlation does not mean causation, but still it is a very high percentage. And in the US, about 15% of high school students drop out for one reason or the other, and over 75% of them report difficulties in reading. And this is an interesting data. We can predict the number of prison cells we need based on the 3rd or 4th grade reading level. That is, if there are 100 children who have reading problems, 10 years later, we can say we need 90 more prison cells. And so, based on 4th grade reading scores, California, for instance, is already planning the number of new prison cells it will need in the next 10 years. And so, with all these learning disabilities, it's not because of lack of money. $500 billion was spent in last year. I don't know how many zeros are in $1 trillion. I think it's something like 12 zeros. Or lack of teachers or their education. At least almost half of the teachers have a master's degree in the US, but I did not mention about the quality of education they receive. Okay? Almost 50% of the school teachers say that they were not taught how to read and how to teach reading and writing in the college courses. So, why is this high incidence? Actually, what are the reasons? And there are only 2 reasons for this high rate of illiteracy, and they are instructional and environmental reasons. And according to instructional reasons, the area has mentioned that it is in the early stages of teaching the basic reading skills, and this has been shown experimentally through Blackman, Texas group, and Florida group have shown that if you identify them early and give proper instruction, then we can stop this illiteracy problem. And especially at the early grade levels. And Connie Jewell, who did a very simple study. I like simple studies, I don't like complex studies. And all she did was, she asked at the end of grade 1, how many of them know the names of letters and the common sounds, and she followed them in grade 4, and those children who knew the names of the letters and common sounds at the end of grade 4, there was about 0.88 probability that they were good readers, and those children who did not know the basic letters and the names of letters and letter sounds, there was about the same proportion of children who were poor readers. So we can kind of predict from grade 1 their development of reading skills. And if you wait till 3rd grade, there is almost 1 in 3 will have reading problem later on in the 9th grade level. There are also environmental reasons, and this is the oral language development, and reading is a written language, so they are closely related. This is a very simple study again, hard and risky. They just take the number of words spoken at the age of 3 and then counted up to there were children who were 3 years and 8 months, both the words of parents and children. And we have welfare families in the US, and the parents and children, they exchange about 10 million words, and children had a vocabulary of 500 words. And middle class families, they exchange about 20 million words, and children had a vocabulary size of 700 at the end of 3 years and 8 months. And professional families have 30 million words were exchanged and about 1100 words in the spoken vocabulary of children. So the oral language is very important in developing reading and writing skills. And the shared self-teaching hypothesis, those who know the foundation, then they can also develop based on that foundation. And this is a very interesting study, number of books available at home by Chang, and this was based on 43 countries, and those children who came from families with over 100 books, then they had better reading and writing skills compared to those families with fewer books. This does not mean that if you just take children and put them in the library, they will learn to read through osmosis. And parents reading the children, and Gina Peterson's work from here, and enjoyment of reading. Again, this is based on 43 countries. And genetics, I think Colorado Family Reading Study has been conducting on this for a long time. And gender differences, again, it was based on 43 countries from Chun McBride Chan. Out of 43 countries, 42 countries, girls performed better than boys on grade 5, and there was only one country where there was no significant difference. So in none of the countries, boys performed better than girls. And I always tell that, nature is cruel to men. Men die at an earlier age than women, and I tell my wife to treat me nicely because men die at an earlier age, and her response is, men die at an earlier age just because they deserve it. We don't deserve to die early. And brain organization has been mentioned that there is the change after receiving the appropriate instruction. So it's not only oral language but also written language, and we are familiar with Seymour's work on the speed and accuracy of about 13 different orthographies, and those that are labeled transparent orthographies, the children acquired that within 1 year, and in English, which is considered opaque, the percentage was different. So here is the graph, and you can see that Greek, Finnish, German, this is also German, there is no Austrian language, but this is the German-speaking children from Austria, and there is 100%, and the French, Portuguese, and Danish is little less than 100%, whereas there is English with about 40%, and this was true for both speed and accuracy. And so this led Seymour to conclude that probably it may take about 2 years of formal instruction for English-speaking children compared to 1 year. Note that this is only for decoding or word reading. This is not involved comprehension, but still English is an outlier orthography, and most of our research is based on English, as Shay had mentioned in his paper. So this led them to hypothesize the orthographic hypothesis, which is the nature of orthography can influence reading acquisition. And so even though brains may be similar, but orthography are certainly not. So this led us to develop the Componential Model of Reading, which has the cognitive components, psychological components, ecological component, and I'm going to talk only about the cognitive component, which has word recognition and comprehension. And these papers have been published in Journal of Learning Disabilities. And word recognition includes the decoding aspect, the sight vocabulary, and speed and accuracy, whereas comprehension was both listening and vocabulary is considered a subcomponent of comprehension. So this is from Scarborough's. It can be seen that word recognition has phonological awareness, decoding, spelling, and sight word recognition, whereas language comprehension involves background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, and so on. And so based on that, there can be three kinds of co-readers: those with decoding problem only, those with comprehension deficit only, and those with deficits in both decoding and comprehension. And so this has been shown based on about 200 participants, those with good decoding but poor comprehension about 7%, and poor decoding and good comprehension about 8%, and those with poor decoding and poor comprehension about 8%. And so we did one of the studies where we selected those with decoding problems, we taught decoding skills, and those with comprehension problems, we taught comprehension skills, and there was a significant improvement difference. And the analogy that I use, I think I'll give an analogy that, there may be darkness here because the bulbs were burned or the fuse blew out. And the fuse is blown out, if you put a brand new light, still we are not going to have light. And if the bulb is burned, no matter what kind of good fuse we put, still we won't have light here. So when the fuse is burned, replace the fuse, and when the light is burned, then replace the bulb. So for those with decoding problem, when they were given the decoding training, there was significant difference. But those with decoding problem, when they were given the comprehension training, there was no significant improvement. And those with comprehension problem, when the comprehension training was given, there was significant improvement. Interestingly, those with comprehension problem, when they were given the decoding training, they still improved, but because decoding acts like a bottleneck. So when they were taught training, decoding, they still improved comprehension. And so, componential model of reading is based on the simple view of reading, and if decoding is 0, then reading comprehension is 0, and if listening comprehension is 0, then also reading comprehension is 0. And we have included the factor of fluency also. But so the first simple view of reading was based from Goff and Tenmer and Hoover and Goff, and it was based on English-Spanish bilingual, and about 50 to 60% of the variance can be explained by these two factors. And this has been conducted for higher grade levels also, and generally from grades 2 through 10, about 40 to 70% of the variance can be explained by these two factors. And compared to IQ, it predicts only 25% of the variance. And this has been replicated in other languages. Norwegian about 50%, Swedish about 50%, French about 50%. But the contribution of decoding and comprehension changes depending on the grade level. For instance, in early grade levels, decoding contributes more, and in upper grade levels, the comprehension plays an important role. And but again, these contributions from decoding and comprehension may depend on the type of orthography. It may be more in opaque languages. Decoding may play a more important role in opaque languages compared to the transparent languages. So in one of our studies, we applied it to Spanish and in grades 2 and 3, and these were both home language and classroom instruction was in Spanish, and administered the Woodcock Unions, and we had a comparative group of English-speaking children in grades 2 through 4, and those are the data weights. But what is interesting here is, even though in our study, the Spanish, we could get a higher percentage among Spanish-speaking children, but the important thing here is the Spanish-speaking profile resembles English-speaking children's profile, but by 1 grade. You can see that in grade 3, it is 47% and 15%, and whereas English-speaking children, they select about, there is the same thing about grade 4. And we have also done this in Chinese, and you can see the character recognition of the decoding aspect, it plays a stronger role in Chinese. This was Mandarin Chinese till upper grade levels. And this is the data that Zvia had provided, and this has just been published in the Scientific Studies of Reading. And Hebrew, as you know, has strange orthography with pointed and unpointed. And I don't know what this means. I think one of them is a cake. I'm not sure. So these are the number of students, and Zvia had administered all these tasks. And even in Hebrew, we found a similar profile, that is, decoding was more important at early grade levels, and comprehension at the upper grade levels. So this is the simple way of reading, or the cognitive component of componential model of reading, can be applicable to other orthographies also. But even this has been shown even in ESL, even though the first study from ESL, Hoover and Goff, included English, Spanish bilingual children. Geva and Fournier showed that in their longitudinal study, about 60% of the variance can be explained by these two factors. And even though decoding was more important in early grade levels, but in comprehension, it took longer for ELL children. They still struggle with language tasks. And similar finding has been reported by Virovin and Van Loon, and there also the L2 children struggle with comprehension tasks. And this was a study that is just been published, and there also this was conducted in India, in slum communities where there is not enough exposure to books, and the home language, the language spoken on the street, is quite different from the language introduced in schools. And every child after grade 3 will be exposed to English. So English is one of the compulsory languages in these schools. And children came from various mother tongues. And what we found was we can explain about the same percentage of variance even in these Indian children. These were bilinguals or multilingual. But one finding that was interesting was, again, because even though it is a highly transparent orthography, but because every sound can be represented, each sound can be represented by only one character or one akshara, and each akshara can only be pronounced one way, that decoding takes a long time to master even at the 5th grade level. And also, for them to learn English, they have to have some foundation of their mother tongue before they can reach the satisfactory level. The first language acts as a threshold. And this is also been conducted in Slovenia. And So again, even though 60% of the variance can be explained by these two factors, the reading comprehension was, the listening comprehension was a better predictor for reading comprehension for skilled readers, but the decoding was a better predictor for less skilled readers. So we have also applied it to bilinguals, and this is a very rough sketch about the decoding and comprehension. So if they are good, the normal reader, but if decoding is poor and the comprehension is good, they are exhibiting dyslexia type syndrome. And those with good decoding but poor comprehension refer to as hyperlexia type syndrome, and those who are poor in both decoding and comprehension, lower ability. This is all nice to put all of these in nice squares, but things do not come like that in life, so it is better to see this as a continuum rather than just either or. And I think I like the Britishers' analogy. They compare reading problem. It is not like being pregnant. Either you have it or you don't have it, but it is more like obesity. Some people are 2 kilograms heavy weight, some people are 10 kilograms overweight, some people are 100 kilograms lower weight. So it goes on a broad range. And so in dyslexia, poor decoding and good comprehension, that is generally understood, but hyperlexia, there is some argument, who can be classified as being hyperlexic. Some people consider that only clinical cases as hyperlexia, those on autism spectrum disorder, but some other group consider as long as there is the discrepancy between decoding and comprehension, they can be labeled as hyperlexia. And there is more research on dyslexia compared to hyperlexia. The last 5 years, there are about 2,500 papers published on dyslexia, and I found only 22 papers published on hyperlexia. And in dyslexia, almost 2/3 of them are in English, and there are some in Chinese and German, but hyperlexia, almost all the papers are based on English. And I found only one paper that was hyperlexic in a trilingual child who is Dutch, French, and German. And mostly monolinguals. And even though there is long history of research in bilingual dyslexia, because the very first paper, or one of the first papers, was based on a bilingual person, but I did not find any hyperlexia from the neuropsychological patients, and I think it is a short history, because the first time the term hyperlexia was used was in 1967, whereas we know that Pringle Morgan used the word 1896 of dyslexia. And actually, one of the first papers by Sherwood, it was based on the bilingual, and this was a 58-year-old teacher of French and German languages, and one day he woke up and he had lost the ability to read in both the languages. And this Hinshelwood wrote in 1902, over 100 years ago, that how come there are only so few reported cases of these bilingual dyslexics. I think people just assume that if you have a problem in one language, you also have a problem in another language. And Obler did the update on the bilingual dyslexia, and even after almost 100 years, she reported that there is virtually no literature on childhood dyslexia in bilinguals, even though the majority of the world's population is bilingual. Still we don't have many studies on bilingual reading problems. The few studies that have the client and doctor, and they use 3 students, 3 subjects, and there were problems in both the languages. And Abu Rabia and Siegel's paper, this was Arabic English bilinguals in Canada, and those who were poor in Arabic were also poor in English test, but one positive aspect of that, if that maybe, is bilingual poor readers perform better than their monolingual counterparts, even though they have a problem in reading and spelling. And another paper, this included 3 languages, and they found that they were poor in Arabic, Hebrew, and English. So based on this, then we can go home and say that if you have a problem in one language, then you will also have a problem in another language. But then in 1999, Weil and Butterworth published a paper of a Japanese-English bilingual boy student, and even though his first language was English, and their parents moved to Japan when he was 6 years of age, he developed reading problem only in English, but not in Japanese. And there's another recent paper from McBride Chang, and they found that it is possible to have problem in only one language and not in the other language. So here there is PC stands for problem in Chinese, problem in English, problem in both Chinese and English. They were poor in phonological awareness tasks, and those who were poor in Chinese and both, they were poor in morphological awareness, and those who were problem in both Chinese and English, they performed poorly on rapid naming. So those who are poor in both, they had problem in phonological awareness tasks, morphological awareness tasks, and the speed, whereas if they had only problem in English, they perform poorly on phonological awareness tasks, but not on morphological and speed. So this was explained through psycholinguistic grain size theory. And so this is a very broad classification by Coulthard, and so the writing systems can be divided into, classified into alphabetic, and this is a very broad classification, syllabic, and they call it logographic, and I don't like that term logographic, so I put more for syllabic. And so Weidel and Butterworth and McBride Chang, they explain that because the orthographic distance, that is, these are alphabetic. I don't know how to do that. So there is the alphabetic languages, and there is the distance, the morphosyllabic languages. So if the distance is further, I'm not very sorry, okay?
Why is it going
Let's see. So if the 2 languages are within the same group, then if they have problem in one, they will also have problem in the other. But if they are in different categories, that's how they explain that it is possible to have problem in only one language. But in the Indian languages, they fall here, even though it is at the syllable level, but they still have the phonemic information. So we wanted to see what happens in Indian language. I mean, this one, does it go here because it is at the syllable level, or does it go here because it has a phonemic representation? So this is based on a single case study, and that's the map of India. And these were 2 participants, both are about 16 years of age. Then there is a comparison group of another 8 students, and both of them came from highly educated families. The parents had a PhD, so the reading problem cannot be attributed to family situation. And so we administered a lot of tests, and what we found was, so this is the Raven score, and so they are all about the same. They did not have any problem in letter naming. They knew. But when it came to non-word reading, you can see that MS, who exhibited hyperlexia type syndrome, he did not have any problem in reading words, both at the English and Kannada, that is the other Indian language that we studied, whereas the VN who exhibited dyslexia type syndrome can see that he had problem in decoding. And this hyperlexic, we should not have collected or counted them as the error, because in India they don't use the term pint. I mean, pint is hardly ever used, but it was on the list, and he read that as pint. And most of these children are not exposed to bacon and so on. But anyway, what is interesting here is, and also every letter is pronounced. This is not really an error, because he read that as tomb. So the final D was pronounced, it was not tomb. And whereas the dyslexic, the target word, what he pronounced, does not even come close to the target word. Despite good decoding strategies, look at his passive comprehension. This is so low. He could only understand about 25% of what he had pronounced. And this was also true at the word level. He would read, he did not know the meaning of words like bread and tomb. That was considered, he could not tell whether they mean the same thing or not. Whereas for the listening comprehension, dyslexic VN, he could understand 95% accuracy, whereas even in listening comprehension, the hyperlexic MS did not perform very well. And this was true in both English and Kannada, the Indian language. It also affected the speed. The hyperlexic, his speed of reading was even slightly better than the normal readers. Once you see that, they will just keep on pronouncing without the meaning. Whereas the dyslexic, you can see the time took about 500 seconds to read the words, 150 words. And even while reading Kannada, they made so many errors. And you can construct phonemic awareness tasks, but it is very difficult to do it. So we did not do at the phonemic level in Kannada, but you can see that hyperlexic did not have problem at the phoneme level of phonological awareness, whereas dyslexic, they perform so poorly even at the phonemic level. So the problem is at the phonemic level, not at the higher syllable level or the rhyme level. And this is the graphic representation of those two in both English and Kannada. You can see the profile is exactly opposite of each other. And some of the sample spelling errors, like in case of MS, hyperlexic, at least you can read the target words, bread, bread, tea, tea. At least you can pronounce, even though they are misspelled, they can be pronounced. Whereas dyslexic, I think he would get the first sound right and then just write some other letters, and it was not even close to the target word. So like sign, sing, thorough, thought. And so the hyperlexic, they can decode well, they can spell well, and whereas the dyslexic, they did not, they had problem at the decoding level, but not at the comprehension level. So, you know that I started out with the problem with illiteracy. It is of societal and national concern, and it affects all walks of life. And decoding and linguistic comprehension, they can explain much of the variance in reading comprehension, whereas IQ predicts only 25% of the variance. And decoding contributes more at the early grade level and comprehension more at the upper grade levels. This is the same concept of learning to read and reading to learn concept, but it also depends on the type of orthography, and language comprehension becomes more important for reading comprehension from the beginning to the more advanced stage. And there were qualitative and quantitative differences in decoding and comprehension between hyperlexic and dyslexic, and literacy acquisition and literacy problem among bilinguals may be influenced by the type of writing system and the orthographic distance between the two languages. Thank you very much. Toda rabah.
Are there any questions?